There is a particular kind of tension that lives inside a championship clubhouse in the final days before a series that matters. It is not the tension of doubt or fear. It is something more complicated than that, a pressure that builds not from weakness but from the collision of enormous expectations, enormous egos, and enormous stakes pressing against each other in a space that was never designed to contain all three simultaneously. The Los Angeles Dodgers know this tension better than almost any organization in baseball. They have lived inside it for years. They have won inside it. They have lost inside it. They have watched it tear teams apart and watched it forge teams into something unbreakable. But what is happening inside Dodger Stadium right now, in the days leading up to the Mariners series, is something different. Something that even the veterans on this roster, men who have seen everything this sport can produce, are watching with a level of attention that goes beyond routine professional awareness. Because this week, the tension has a name. And that name is Shohei Ohtani. The news broke on a Thursday morning that sent an immediate current of electricity through the baseball world. Ben Rortvedt, the catcher who had been quietly but purposefully brought into the Dodgers organization, had not signed a short-term, prove-yourself, one-foot-in-the-door kind of deal. He had signed a 2-year contract. A commitment. A declaration from the organization that this was not a temporary arrangement built around one start, one series, or one moment of organizational necessity. This was a partnership. And partnerships, in the language of professional baseball, carry weight that single transactions simply do not. The announcement confirmed what many inside the game had suspected but few had said out loud, that the Dodgers were building something specific around Ohtani's return to pitching, and that Rortvedt was not a placeholder in that plan. He was a cornerstone of it. Within hours of the contract announcement, something else happened that the baseball world had been waiting for since Rortvedt's name first appeared in Dodgers discussions. He appeared in a Dodgers uniform. And he had a number. There is something about seeing a player in a new uniform for the first time that cuts through all the noise of contracts and negotiations and organizational strategy. It makes everything real in a way that press releases and official announcements simply cannot. When Ben Rortvedt walked into Dodger Stadium wearing Dodger blue, his number visible on his back, the transition from rumor to reality was complete. Players noticed. Coaches noticed. The support staff noticed. Even in a clubhouse full of all-stars and future Hall of Famers, men who have learned to maintain a surface-level calm about roster moves because roster moves are simply the weather of this profession, Rortvedt's arrival in uniform created a visible shift in the room's atmosphere. Some of it was curiosity. Some of it was the natural recalibration that happens whenever a new personality enters an established ecosystem. But most of it, if the observers present that day were being completely honest, was about what Rortvedt's presence represented. It meant Ohtani was truly going to pitch. Not in a bullpen session. Not in a controlled practice environment with radar guns and clipboards and the comfortable distance of preparation. He was going to pitch in a game that mattered, against an opponent that would be hunting every weakness his returning arm might reveal, in front of a stadium full of people carrying expectations that no athlete should reasonably be asked to bear alone. And Ben Rortvedt was going to be the man crouching behind the plate when he did it. The second pitching practice session between Ohtani and Rortvedt took place on Friday morning, less than 48 hours before the first pitch of the Mariners series. If the first session had been about introduction, about two professionals beginning the delicate process of building the communication and trust that defines the pitcher-catcher relationship, the second session was something else entirely. It was sharper. More purposeful. The kind of practice that exists not to introduce but to confirm. Ohtani took the mound with the same focused stillness that has defined every public moment of his return. He did not look around the facility. He did not acknowledge the coaches watching from behind the fence or the handful of teammates who had gathered at a respectful distance to observe. He looked at Rortvedt, received his sign, and threw. The velocity was there. Anyone watching with a radar gun, and there were several people watching with radar guns, could confirm that. But velocity, for a pitcher of Ohtani's caliber, has never been the question. The question has always been about something harder to measure. Something that exists in the relationship between a pitcher's mechanics and his confidence, between his physical readiness and his psychological willingness to fully commit to the violence of a major league fastball. What the observers saw in that second session was an answer. Not a complete answer. Not the kind of answer that removes all doubt or silences all concern. But an answer nonetheless, a visible, measurable, undeniable signal that Shohei Ohtani was not simply going through the motions of preparation. He was ready to compete. Rortvedt, for his part, handled the session with the quiet authority of a catcher who understands that his most important job in these early stages is not to manage the pitcher but to listen to him. Every pitch is a conversation. Every sign given and accepted or shaken off is a negotiation. The best catchers in baseball are not the ones who impose a game plan, they are the ones who are skilled enough to receive what a pitcher is offering and shape it into something the team can win with. By the end of the session, those watching from behind the fence were exchanging glances that said more than any post-practice interview ever could. But while Ohtani and Rortvedt were building something on the practice mound, something very different was unfolding inside the clubhouse walls. It started, as these things often do in tight-knit professional environments, with something small. A comment. A tone. A moment where the invisible boundaries of the clubhouse social order were tested by someone who perhaps did not fully appreciate where those boundaries were drawn. Mookie Betts, the Dodgers' spiritual engine, the player whose energy and professionalism set the standard that everyone else in that clubhouse measures themselves against, had been watching the preparations for the Mariners series with the focused intensity that defines everything he does. He had watched the roster moves. He had watched Rortvedt's arrival. He had watched the pitching sessions. And he had been watching Ohtani. What exactly passed between them? What specific moment or sequence of moments pushed Betts past the threshold of his characteristic composure, was not witnessed in its entirety by any single person. But what multiple sources inside the facility confirmed was this: Mookie Betts raised his voice at Shohei Ohtani. Directly. Without intermediary. Without the diplomatic softening that governs most communication between star players who understand the fragility of clubhouse chemistry. He raised his voice, and he said what he had apparently been holding back for longer than anyone outside that inner circle had realized. The people who heard it described the moment as jarring, not because Betts lost control, because Mookie Betts does not lose control, but because the emotion behind his words was so visible, so uncharacteristically exposed, that it made everyone in the vicinity instinctively still. What was Betts so angry about? The answer, when it was pieced together through multiple accounts from people present that day, was both simpler and more complicated than the baseball world might have expected. It was not about performance. It was not about strategy or lineup decisions or the organizational choice to pair Ohtani with Rortvedt instead of a more established veteran catcher. It was about preparation. Specifically, it was about the way Ohtani was approaching his preparation, and the effect that approach was having on the people around him. Betts, according to those present, had watched Ohtani conduct himself through these pitching sessions with what the veteran outfielder perceived as a troubling degree of isolation. Not the focused, productive isolation of an athlete entering a performance mindset, but a withdrawal. A pulling away from the collective preparation of a team that was about to play one of the most consequential series of its season. In Betts' world, in the world of championship-level professional baseball as he has lived and practiced and embodied it for his entire career, a team prepares together. A team communicates. A team carries its individual burdens in a way that does not place invisible weight on the shoulders of the people standing next to them. And in Betts' assessment, delivered not privately, not gently, but directly and with the full force of his conviction, Ohtani was not doing that. He was carrying everything alone. And that aloneness, Betts believed, was not strength. It was a wall. And walls, in a clubhouse that needed to function as a single organism against a Mariners team that was fully capable of exploiting any crack in the Dodgers' collective focus, were dangerous. Ohtani, by every account, absorbed Betts' words without visible reaction. He stood and he listened and he did not respond. Whether that silence represented agreement, disagreement, or simply the processing of something too significant to answer in the moment, no one who was present could say with certainty. But the room felt different after it happened. Not worse. Not fractured or damaged in the way that public confrontations between star players sometimes fracture a clubhouse. Different in the way a room feels after a window has been opened, the same room, the same people, but something previously sealed now exposed to the air. By Friday evening, pieces of the story had begun to surface on social media. Fragments. Second-hand accounts. The inevitable distortion that happens when private moments become public currency in the digital age. Fans debated. Analysts speculated. Former players offered their interpretations of what a confrontation between Betts and Ohtani might mean for team chemistry entering a critical series. The Dodgers said nothing officially. They never do. But inside that clubhouse, something had shifted. A conversation had been forced into the open that everyone had perhaps known needed to happen. The kind of conversation that hurts in the moment and heals over time, if the people involved are capable of the honesty and the humility that real healing requires. Whether Ohtani and Betts are capable of that, whether this team, carrying all of its talent and all of its pressure and all of its internal friction into a Mariners series that the baseball world is watching with undivided attention, can transform that Friday morning confrontation into fuel rather than fracture. That question will be answered on the field. Not in press conferences. Not in social media statements. Not in the careful, managed language of organizational communication. On the field. Where it has always been answered. Where it will always be answered. Rortvedt is in uniform. Ohtani has his number. The practice sessions are done. Betts has said what needed to be said. Now the only thing left is the game. And all of baseball is watching.